Hi, my name is Kelly Halstead. I am a board certified behavior analyst at Connecticut Behavioral Health in Cheshire, Connecticut. Today we're going to be discussing modifying relationships and demands with pairing, shaping, and differential reinforcement. We're going to do a general overview of reinforcement, pairing yourself with a reinforcer and why it's so important to your instruction, delivering appropriate demands, shaping those demands into successful approximations, and the effectiveness of differential reinforcement and behavior change. Reinforcement is a consequence applied immediately following a behavior that will strengthen a future behavior response whenever that behavior is preceded by a specific antecedent stimulus. As we have discussed in past trainings, positive reinforcement is the cornerstone of ABA and is very important, and it is the most effective form of reinforcement for successful behavior change. So looking over here in this diagram, positive reinforcement falls in this upper left-hand quadrant here, which is basically just telling us that reinforcement increases the frequency of a desirable behavior, and it's determined that it's positive reinforcement because we're adding something to the environment. So adding to the environment and increasing like the likelihood or frequency of a desired behavior would be considered positive reinforcement. So here I've compiled a list of really tangible samples of types of reinforcement, positive reinforcement. So you'll notice that everything is added to the environment. So a sticker chart would be added to a sticker would be added to a sticker chart. Tokens would be added on a token board. You can add a special dessert after completing a dinner or any meal. Points toward computer time, high fives, or any addition of verbal praise within an instructional or skill acquisition session would all be considered positive reinforcement. We're really focusing on kind of the tangible activity here, but what is the common denominator? How does the student receive access to all of those above items or materials or activities? And the answer is you. You're the one that's really delivering and in charge of when the student gets access to those things. So we really have to figure out a way to pair ourselves into that equation. Pairing is a common term used to describe the process of building or maintaining rapport with a student. It develops a strong foundation upon which all good instruction is built. Whenever we're starting a therapeutic relationship, so as we approach the first day of school, after quite a long recess for a lot of our students, they've been home for quite a while with all of the shutdown related closures. The therapeutic relationships should start off low demand and high reward, meaning we're not going to expect on the first day of school, probably not for the first few or several weeks of school, that we're working on high demand activities. Most likely we're going to be starting off low demand, reacclimating our students back into just being in the physical building of school, and really using a lot of high levels of positive reinforcement to make sure that they're comfortable, you know, kind of being away from their caregivers and really entering back into school, and really focusing on just having them have access to a lot of high reward activities, just to keep them happy for being in the building. Pairing never stops, it evolves. So just like we're talking about, we might spend a good 5 or 6 weeks really focusing on low demand and high reward activities just to get them reacclimated into school. But then eventually we're going to have to start increasing academic and skill acquisition demands. So it's not going to stop, but it will evolve. We really need to change the mindset of having students earn a break away from instructors. So it's beneficial for the instructor to be a part of the break. You can work on different social skills and incidental skills during break while maintaining that instructional control over the session. Some people view pairing or rapport building as a waste of time because to an untrained eye, it may appear like an unproductive play session. However, it is some of the most important work that you can do long-term to really support your students' relationship with you and just in general, their skill acquisition abilities. So I found this little funny meme, I guess, on iloveaba.com. The first day of ABA therapy, the therapist, will say, you get an iPad and you get a train and look at the bubbles and let's play some games. And that's really kind of the mindset that we need to have when we are taking time to pair ourselves with the reinforcers. So how do we pair? First, you want to limit access to reinforcers. You want to utilize simple demands with no directions and no questions. Make yourself and your area the most fun place to be and have fun. So I'm going to kind of break down all of these how-tos in the upcoming slides. So limit access to the reinforcers. You want to kind of you want to have access and control of all of the reinforcers, and you want to have a variety of reinforcers available to you immediately. So you might kind of go around the room and use a bucket or a basket and kind of gather some items near you, close to you. You want to measure that student's motivation and just kind of present little things simplistically, just kind of take things out, show them, make them look cool, exciting. And you might want to require a simple directive as like, come sit over here, or hey, give me a high five or a fist bump. We wouldn't use our SD instructional voice for this. We would really just want to focus on being like playful and calming and fun, but you really want to measure that motivation. So for example, if you're holding kind of a Thomas toy and really your student doesn't seem interested, you might shift gears immediately and maybe pull out a container of Play-Doh or a container of bubbles and go from there. So you really need to kind of measure that motivation. Are they approaching you? Are they going further away from you? Is your toy maybe making a noise that could be off-putting to them? You really need to be kind of in tune with their motivation. You don't want to say anything that's going to require a specific response. Some of us, this is very difficult for because we want to always be looking for opportunities to teach or to do a skill acquisition activity. But we really want to focus our language instead of saying like, what color car is that you're playing with? You might say, wow, look at that shiny red car. It's so awesome. I bet you it goes really fast. So really just making sure that you're not, a lot of students will perceive any question as a demand and immediately be put off by that. We're not requiring the learner to engage in any way. So we're only really doing speak-only statements for ourselves, like, hey, look at this shiny red car, vroom, vroom, it's going so fast. You're really just kind of having a narrative for yourself and hoping that the student will engage. You're not requiring any responses back from them. You want to make yourself and your area the most fun place to be in the classroom or wherever you are. So when your student is engaged, they should not be motivated to go anywhere else. If they do travel away from you, you want to make sure that all that fun that you're providing immediately in your area stops. And then once they approach again, you really want to just continue kind of that game on activity, really having fun, really engaging with them. And you really also want to make sure you're having fun. If you aren't enjoying yourself, then your student probably isn't either. You want to sing songs, smile, make funny noises, silly faces, really gauge what your learner is looking for you to do, and really just try to continue to be enthusiastic, be genuine, and be fun. Pairing never ends, but there is really no fixed schedule. Research shows that pairing is very important, but there's no kind of tried and true, do it for 2 weeks, do it for 3 weeks. You really kind of have to measure your learner individually. You do want to build pairing time into every session. I would say that this is more important, as I already discussed, in the beginning of the school year, in the beginning of the week, after a long recess, winter recess, or April break, or anything like that. And it really never stops, but it will evolve. So you might spend most of your days in the beginning of the school year really spending time to pair. And then, as needed, you may just be able to reduce that time systematically. How do you know when you're paired? So while we don't have, kind of a research that supports how often or how long we should pair, there is research to show how you know when you are paired. So you're going to begin to see an increase in attending of your student. They will have increased compliance with simple demands when they are introduced, so they're more likely to comply sooner with those simple demands. They may begin to take your lead, so while you're doing your pairing, you are kind of taking their lead, but they may begin to take your lead, whether it's handing you something and expecting you to kind of complete that fun activity or fun routine with them. So they're going to start coming to you to take the lead, that would be a really nice way to determine if you are paired. And you're also going to see a decrease in maladaptive behaviors. So now what? When your student is approaching you readily, beginning to bring novel objects to you and initiating games and fun routines, it's time to increase those demands. So we're not going to just continue to play all day. We have to start determining the skill level of our student. So we need information from an interdisciplinary team. Any holistic and really comprehensive ABA type programming should include social skills, academic skills, motor skills, communication skills, and functional skills. When we're looking to create programming, I'm looking at everybody. I'm looking at a teacher, actually two teachers, a general education teacher and special education teacher. I'm looking at a speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, school social worker, school psychologist if necessary, and myself as BCBA. And we're all going to sit down and really develop a holistic approach to our programming. I can speak to some of the assessments that I do as a BCBA in this training, and then we can also discuss other types of assessments, skill assessments and preference assessments that we also discuss. The bulk of my assessments that I conduct is functional behavioral assessments. It's a systematic method of assessment for obtaining information about the purposes or functions a problem behavior serves for a person. It's a process for developing an understanding of the student's challenging behavior and how the behavior is influenced by environmental factors. It identifies the environmental factors or events that consistently predict or result from a student's challenging behavior. So after I do observations, I can determine why behaviors are occurring, hopefully. Sometimes it's just hypothesis, but a lot of times I can determine what the function of the behavior is, and then we can go from there. FBAs can be conducted individually or by a team. So typically I will take the lead on authoring the document, but I definitely need help with data collection from teachers or support staff, paraprofessionals, behavior techs, whoever is going to collect your data. I collect information through the use of observation, interviews, and record reviews. So I will do a good chunk of observation, but I also rely on data collection to be taken while I'm not available. And information gathered is used to understand what happens before that target behavior, which would be an antecedent, what the target behavior looks like, what would be a target behavior, and what happens after the target behavior, which would be the consequence. So we're really looking at ABC data collection. I'm going to determine, hopefully, if my FBA is successful and comprehensive, the function of a behavior. There are 4 functions of behavior. Behaviors can occur for attention-seeking function, access to tangibles, avoidance or escape behaviors, or sensory stimulation. There can also be a combination of one or all, depending on how complex the student can be. It's also really nice to do a comprehensive FBA to not only determine the function of behaviors, but to determine other information. You can also determine best learning procedures. So does your student work best in a small group? Does your student prefer to be in a whole group and just need some modifications? Is discrete trial an effective instructional method for your student? We could also learn appropriate setting modifications, effective reinforcement rates, fading procedures, and generalization recommendations. So an FBA is a pretty comprehensive document that will hopefully not only focus on the functions of behavior, but what we can do to also support the learner in other ways. The ABLES is the assessment of basic language and learning skills, and it is an assessment tool, a curriculum guide, and a skill tracking system. It's used to guide instruction of language and critical learner skills. It's used to identify skills needed by students to effectively communicate and learn. and it's used to develop a highly individualized language-based curriculum. It addresses basic language, academic, self-help, classroom, and gross and fine motor skill sets. Within the ABLES, there are approximately 25 subsections within main categories, and they can cover anything from labeling to play and leisure to interverbals. There's a section for reading, math, writing, dressing, eating, grooming, toileting. It is very comprehensive. It provides a quick review for parents and educators to identify the skill level of a student. So this is just the front page of the protocol book. And then here I've just included one sample sheet to show you how comprehensive it can be. These are just 3 categories within the protocol booklet. So you can see in the area of cooperation and reinforcer effectiveness, it will really break down if a student can take reinforcer when offered, take a common object from an instructor, respond within 3 seconds to instruction. So it really, really breaks down many, many skills in almost a task analysis format. It's really nice because you can continue testing. You can continue testing the learner kind of against themselves to determine progress. So up here, you'll see that you can administer this a bunch of times. What we like to do is just color code it differently. So you'll actually see, this would be a graph when it's all colored in, and you can see the growth of the student, which is a really nice tool to use for parents and staff. The VB Map is a verbal behavior milestones assessment and placement program. It is a criterion referenced assessment tool, a curriculum guide, and a skill tracking system. The VB Map measures key areas: language, social, pre-academics, and group skills. It identifies developmental levels versus development of a 4-year-old child. It identifies barriers that may impact learning. The VB Map has 5 components. It has the milestones assessment, which is a sample of a child's current verbal and related skills. A barriers assessment, which analyzes 24 common learning and language acquisition barriers. A transitions assessment, which determines whether a child is making meaningful progress. A task analysis and skills tracking component, which targets specific content to be taught. And a placement in IEP's goals component, which provides specific recommendations based on info obtained in the assessment. And likewise, I've just placed the protocol front page here and just a sample of the skill tracking as well. So there is discussion about what is better, how they're different, ABLES versus the VB Map. The ABLES is a criterion referenced. So it's criterion reference, meaning the student kind of masters out against themselves. There's really no norm there. It's useful in developing accurate and meaningful programming, but it's not developmentally sequenced. So you do kind of need to go through the whole thing, even if you're kind of bottoming out. The VB Map is developmentally based criterion reference tool, and it's field tested with typically developing children and children with ASD. I prefer, there's always this discussion, what do you prefer? The ABLES is extremely comprehensive. It is long, it is bulky, it sometimes can be cumbersome. However, we have had great success in creating solid ABLES-based holistic programming within an ABA setting. So I have a preference of the ABLES, but it's really just a personal preference. There really is no right and wrong. It's what your staff is familiar with, what they're comfortable administering, but both are very relevant assessment tools. So these assessments will give us baseline data. Baseline data is data that is collected prior to any instruction. Any data from the above assessments should be considered baseline data. So when you're administering these assessments, you're kind of going in fresh and you're kind of assessing the student that is new to you and determining what they can do. If assessments are completed, IEP goals can be created and programs can be written. This is a review of some other information that we discussed, baseline data and then a prompt level. So you want to make sure that your baseline data, once you have a baseline, you are going through and determining prompt levels based on your prompt hierarchy for instruction. Shaping is the reinforcement of successive approximations of the desired behavior. It's also known as successful approximation. How do you shape a behavior? First, you want to define the target, collect that baseline data, determine the incremental skills needed to be successful, and then reinforce successful approximations of the target. So initially, you want to identify the desired behavior and then determine that final goal. Then you want to be able to identify the student's present level of performance in displaying the desired behavior, list the steps that will incrementally get from where the student is to where the student should be, and then once the student has mastered a specific behavior, you want to require that he or she demonstrate the next stage of the behavior in order to receive a reward. So why is shaping so important? So you want to make sure that we might all have a goal, you know, our program goal for every student might be the same, but some students might not be able to get there based on their current level of performance. So how can we shape behaviors to get them where they need to be? The real possibilities really are endless. So you can use shaping in skill acquisition, from sitting at a table to responding to name, writing, creating marks on a paper, to actual letter formation. Vocal communication can be imitating sounds and words, and expecting approximations of sounds versus words. So some students in your class might be able to say hi. Some students might just be able to say, and you can work on expecting that, but then always reaching higher to shape that behavior. Increasing routine following, so an unpacking routine, reducing screen time, making a bed, social skills, saying hi to appear next to them, increasing playtime, increasing the variety of toy play skills, using playground equipment, and creating novel bids for attention during play. So you can shape all of these behaviors. So you'll take kind of where your student is, figure out how to incrementally increase them to their final goal, and work on building and shaping those skills. So it's all connected. When we're teaching a chain, it's important to accept those approximations of the correct response so the learner doesn't get stuck. We don't want to work on anything for too long. We also need to use high levels of reinforcement for all of these types of teaching, and use preference assessments that we've discussed in past trainings. Differential reinforcement is providing reinforcement to one response class and not providing or withholding the reinforcement from another response class. It's one of the most highly recommended strategies for reducing problem behavior. Providing reinforcement for the occurrence of a behavior that is not the targeted maladaptive behavior, or providing reinforcement for reduced rates of the maladaptive behavior. Differential reinforcement involves withholding reinforcement or not reinforcing the targeted behavior as much as possible. Before we get really into that scientific differential reinforcement measures, I just want to remind everybody that different levels of reinforcement are required for fading purposes and generalization. We're not going to throw a party for mastered skills, and likewise, we're not going to celebrate generalized skills as often as we would be celebrating skill acquisition programs. We do want to still throw in some opportunities for positive reinforcement just to keep our learner involved and excited about learning. There are 4 main types of differential reinforcement. These include a DRI, DRA, DRO, and DRL. We're going to break all of these down. A DRI is differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. A behavior that is incompatible with the targeted behavior is reinforced at a higher rate than the targeted behavior itself. This is used to substitute a behavior. Incompatible behaviors are any behaviors that cannot be done simultaneously. An example, you can't sit and stand at the same time. You won't be able to write with a pencil and bite your nails at the same time. And you won't be able to be quiet and speaking at the same time. So all of those behaviors are incompatible. DRA is the differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. So reinforcement of an alternative behavior while withholding reinforcement for an inappropriate behavior. So you're putting that undesired behavior on extinction, and then students will not get reinforced for that behavior. For DRA, you must know the function of the behavior you are trying to reduce. So that's why we included the functions of behavior previously in the training. And you want to reinforce any behavior that serves the same function except for the target behavior at that time. So examples of this would be if your student is engaging in mouthing non-edible objects, as like example of coins, you want to perhaps give them an oral chew activity or plan. If they're raising their hand, they should not be calling out at the same time. Some students may, to get attention from a peer or a staff member, may hit instead of greeting them. So that would be, the attention would be the function there, and you would be looking to increase the responding of an appropriate responding versus a hitting response. DRO is the differential reinforcement of other behaviors. So you're going to reinforce the absence of the target behavior after a specific amount of time. So you're going to reinforce anything except the target behavior during that time. You must have a very specific target behavior for a decrease, and you're going to use DRO to eliminate a behavior entirely. So an example of how to do a DRO, you would set a timer after collecting your baseline data and reinforce anything except that target behavior. So if, for example, the target behavior is hair pulling, you would want to set a timer after you've collected your baseline data. Say your student engages in hair pulling every 20 seconds. So you might set a timer for every 15 seconds, and every time that time elapses without the occurrence of hair pulling, you would provide positive reinforcement in any way that would be effective for your student. And then you would be incrementally increasing those lengths of time, those durations, and hopefully see an elimination in that hair pulling. DRL is a differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. It provides a system for reducing a behavior without eliminating it, and it's used to shape a behavior over time. So a DRL example might be you're going to want to lower the rate of a student who asks for help too often because it may hinder their independence. You're going to want to lower the rate of a student who raises their hand all the time and doesn't allow for others to respond. And you're going to want to lower the rate of making errors if a student works too quickly. How can you do any of this? Well, for a student who raises their hand too often or all the time, you might provide them with a set number of cards or chips, and they have to turn them in every time they raise their hand. Likewise, for students who ask for help all the time, you might want to have them only request help for a certain number of times throughout the day or for specific activities. So today we discussed a lot of concepts. We discussed reinforcement, pairing ourselves with a reinforcer, appropriate demands and kind of how to develop them based on assessments, shaping those demands, and differential reinforcement. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me at this email and I'd be happy to return your with some answers. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit. Take care.